Lisa Smith, and this is Enlightened Conversations. Enlightened Conversations brings together people from throughout our community to discuss issues of social injustice, discrimination, and racism. Through these conversations, we hope to learn more about each other and more about what we can all do together to end these injustices. Tonight's topic is transgender individuals. We are all labeled with a gender identity at birth, based on merely visual evidence. But what we've learned over time is that visual evidence is not the only thing that makes up one's gender identity. It's much more complicated than that. And sometimes that initial label is not correct. Tonight we are talking to Joanne Carroll, Executive Director of Trans Advocacy Pennsylvania. As a transgender woman, Joanne brings firsthand experience to the work of the organization. She is here on Enlightened Conversations to share her experience and her knowledge with us about the issues facing our transgender population. Welcome, Joanne.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Good. Before we go into any of the questions, I need to address an issue within the room that some of you are going to be seeing. You may have noticed a little bit ago that the light above me, which was dim, blinked on, and in a little bit it'll blink off. That's nothing strange. I don't think the building is haunted, but apparently the light above me is going out. So it will go in and out as the evening goes on, and if we have a very kind-hearted electrician in the audience, perhaps he might want to stop by the YW someday and see about fixing that light for us. That would be wonderful. So back to the matter at hand. Joanne, when did you first begin to feel that you were identified incorrectly at birth as a boy, or that something was different that you couldn't quite identify?
When I was about 4 or 5, I knew something was strange because they kept telling me I was a boy, but yet everything I liked had to do with things girls did or things girls were, and I became acutely aware on about my 4th or 5th Christmas. We were at my grandmother's house. I was born up in Canada, incidentally, and it was up there. But anyway, we were at my grandmother's house, and my girl cousins were there in their pinafores and Mary Janes, and I was wearing brogans and a clunky vest and bow tie, and they were opening up dolls and tea sets, and I was getting cannons and tractors, and as much as a 4-year-old mind can process, I mean, that just didn't seem right to me, because I wanted what they did, what they got, and I wanted to look like they looked, and that just wasn't possible.
Just didn't fit.
This was in the early 1940s, so that wasn't a possibility for a discussion. First of all, the language wasn't there. Nobody knew anything about it, really. It wasn't new. I mean, transgender people have been around forever because the indigenous tribes had two-spirit people and everything else going back way into history. But it probably wasn't until 1952 when Christine Jorgensen came back from Denmark, having had gender reassignment surgery, and that hit the papers big. I mean, if people thought the Caitlyn Jenner story was huge, man, that story with Christine was big.
Well, she was the first.
Well, no, I wouldn't even go that far. The Danish girl. Now, I don't know if you saw that movie, but she had gone through gender reassignment surgery much earlier. But anyway, when that happened and all that publicity surrounding Christine Jorgensen occurred, I went, oh, wow. Somebody else was obviously feeling the same things that I have been. And then basically that got me on a lifetime pursuit of information. And there was nothing. None of what we have today. I mean, now you go on the internet and Google transgender, and it's going to give you probably a million different things, and some of them you don't want to even go look at, because obviously people have objectified the process, So I spent a lifetime basically trying to figure myself out. And one of the things I guess I would like to add to the conversation, and that is, I am a woman of faith. I'm an unapologetic follower of Jesus Christ. And God is who helped me figure out who I am. Because I have a story that I could tell you about that, but for the interest of time, I'll just say that He helped me realize that I was in my own way. And it wasn't him that was stopping me from being authentic, it was myself, because I couldn't accept what was real, because I didn't think he would love me if I transitioned. So.
Right.
So basically 4 or 5, to answer your question, that's when I knew.
Okay.
I never did transition until I was about 60 years of age, just before I actually moved to Pennsylvania. So,
Really?
yeah.
Okay. When did you bring it up to anybody beforehand? Did you discuss it with your parents as a child?
Well, I grew up in a very religious family.
Okay.
It was a conservative Baptist family. My daddy had been a missionary one time, and worked as a lay preacher at the local mission. That wasn't going to be a conversation that would go well.
No.
I mean,
would think not.
even sex, I mean, nobody actually even took me aside and said, this is what happens with the birds and bees and people.
Right, that conversation.
I did like
didn't
everybody
happen.
else in that era. I learned my sex information on the street. 'Cause let's face it, that's how it happened for a lot of us,
Right.
because that just wasn't a conversation you had. So, no, there was no opportunity for that. Daddy passed away in 92. 91, 92, and then it was just my mom left, and when I told her, she was so supportive. And what's really interesting is I actually think that there's a possibility that I was born intersex. Because when I told my mother, she said, why would you feel guilty about something you obviously were born with? And I went, I mean, I didn't think about it at the time, but as the time's gone on, I thought, well, what was that about? Did she know something that they never told me? Daddy molested me when I was 13, but it was more like he was checking things as opposed to feeling me up or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I just don't know. Either way, it's the same difference, being born in the wrong body. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. So your mom was very supportive?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I'll tell you a funny story. I transitioned in a place where nobody in Pennsylvania's ever heard of, Scottsbluff, Nebraska.
That's a little town, I think.
Yeah, it is, about 21,000 people, way out in sugar beet country in western Nebraska, about 50 miles from Wyoming, and about 130 miles from Denver, Colorado. To tell you that the 21,000 people were all rednecks, that would be a lie. Only 18,000 were.
Yeah.
The other 3,000 got up in the morning and did this, so they could blend in. So, but at any rate, that's where I transitioned, and I had gone with my mom to a little non-denominational fundamental church once as my boy self, because I didn't want them to get in the habit of seeing that person, because I knew I was going to transition. So I did, and I met a friend of hers at that church at that one Sunday. And so about 3 months later, I transitioned in February of 2001, and we ran into this lady like in April, something like that. And she and Mom met in the grocery store and were bip, 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 back and forth like two little old ladies would normally do. And pretty soon the woman turns and says, "Who's this?" And my mom says, "Well, that's my daughter, Joanne." And she says, "Oh my goodness. I knew you had a son named John. I didn't know you had a daughter named Joanne." And my mom said, "Well, they're the same person and I like her better."
Oh. God love her.
Yeah,
oh my
I know.
God.
And she always got my pronouns right. She never made a mistake on my name. I'm the one that screwed up more than she ever did.
Yeah.
So,
That's wonderful.
yeah, she was absolutely fabulous. So.
That's pretty rare for a person of that generation.
And another cute little anecdote, she was bedridden for the last 15 months of her life. I told you already off camera that she passed away just short of her 102nd birthday. And for the last 15 months of her life, I was taking care of her in bedridden. And one day she looked at me and she said, "Honey," she says, "I'm so glad you're a girl." And I went, "Okay." She said, "If you're a boy giving me this level of care, people might think it was creepy." So she was wonderful.
Great.
She really was.
She was really good about it. How about other family members, friends?
My first ex-wife tolerated it well because she had a transgender professor in college. My second wife didn't have much to do with it. She was good for about the first 3 days, and then she realized that if we stayed together, people would brand her as a lesbian, and she wasn't quite down for that.
So you were still married to the second wife
yeah.
at that point, yeah.
And I have 2 biological daughters, an adopted daughter and 2 stepdaughters, and I have a relationship with all 5.
That's good.
I've had the opportunity to be with my grandchildren as me, and everything's worked out fine. So,
yeah. How old are the grandchildren?
well, they range in age from Oh, see, I was afraid you were going to do that to me.
Uh,
Let's see, the oldest is probably in her late 20s,
okay,
and the youngest is, no wait, that's not even correct. Yeah, my grandchildren. And the youngest is probably about 12 or 13.
Okay.
And then I have a great-granddaughter
wow,
as well, so.
yeah. Kids are always so much more accepting of
Well,
things.
nowadays they
and
really are, because
Yeah.
they see it every day. You
Right.
know, and it's part of
And
their
they're-
parlance of growing up now, so.
they're much more open.
Yeah.
One of the things that has always intrigued me, or I guess intrigued is not the right word, but has always concerned me, is the fact that that it would appear to me that people like yourself, who have come to the conclusion that they obviously are in the wrong body,
Well,
or
we
have
say,
the
we
wrong,
say that, but. you
or
know,
in the gender,
Yeah, right.
that they've been classified incorrectly. There must be a period of time prior to making that decision and coming to do something about it, where there's a great deal of emotional pain and trauma.
Oh.
And,
Yeah, I can't even tell you what
I
that's
just,
like.
I feel bad for people to have to go through that. And then when they take steps to remedy the situation, they end up with more trauma because people don't accept them.
Yeah.
Is that one
That
of the
is-
bigger
that-
issues?
That's absolutely an on-point observation.
Okay,
There's probably not any adequate way that I can explain to you the angst that I went through, the trauma. But imagine, if you would, waking up and looking in a mirror and not liking what you see every day.
mm-hmm,
You know, it's not a matter of, okay. And it's not that anybody else can see that, it's only you that can see that
Right.
problem. And that makes it even that much worse, because it's something that you have buried inside of you that you really can't share with somebody else. I can literally tell you that from the time I became aware of what transgender was until I took the steps to be authentic, every night before I went to bed, and I screamed at God more often than I didn't. I said, look, when I wake up in the morning, either let this go away or fix it.
mm-hmm,
I'll take either one. And of course, neither one of those happened, because it was action I had to take on my own behalf.
right,
Because I had to grab the bull by the horns and do something. And you're exactly right about the second part of your observation, and that is the discrimination and everything that exists. Case in point, unemployment is rampant within the community. Before COVID, our national unemployment rate was around 3-4%, in some places 2 to 3. For the transgender community, if you're white and you're transgender, your rate of unemployment is somewhere around 15 to 20%. If you're black and transgender, it's sometimes in excess of 25%.
oh, good Lord,
There's also the issue of underemployment. There's a great number in our community that are working well below what they're trained to do. I have a good friend she is actually now going for her doctorate up at Penn State, but at the time she was sitting on a master's degree in education and was working in a Barnes & Noble. That's the best she could get. I have a friend in Sacramento who has a PhD. I don't remember what her specialty is, but she's assistant manager in the Burger King. And that's the best they can get, because nobody else will give them the time of
give
day
them the
as a
chance,
job.
yeah,
I was lucky. I have to tell you, I really was. I was very fortunate, but then again, I had got involved in my transition.
yeah,
And I honestly believe I was blessed because of it. I'm not going to go into all the details, but because it belies what I just told you. But I'm extremely blessed. I really am. And we got flies in here.
yeah,
In case somebody wondered what I was grabbing.
Yeah.
I don't have Tourette's, in case somebody wondered. But some other points. Underemployment is a problem. Unemployment is a problem. On-the-job harassment is a problem. Obviously, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we have a big problem because there's no statewide, Commonwealth-wide protections for
right,
SOGI, for sexual orientation or gender identity. We've had that in the legislature stuck for 15 years because one certain party that's in power just doesn't want to do anything about it because the expressions like, we don't want to add classes to the Human Rights Act. It's not a matter of adding classes, it's a matter of making the board, evening up the board for everybody. But the case in point, you can get married to a same-sex partner on Saturday, come to work on Monday, put the picture of you and your spouse on your desk, and get fired that afternoon for being in a same-sex marriage.
Right.
So there's no protections. Now, there's 59 communities that have passed ordinances. Lancaster, Harrisburg, and I think York have. I don't know that Hanover has yet. But we've had some action in some real small communities. We had it in Huntingdon. We've had actions in some of the places you wouldn't even believe. Stroudsburg, for goodness sake.
Positive
Yeah,
actions?
where they've actually
Okay.
adopted an ordinance where it gives the protection of non-discrimination in the area of housing, healthcare, across the board.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trans or if you're gay, you cannot be discriminated against for that in those communities.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's a lot of work we need to do yet.
Absolutely.
And of course, we have a national bill through the Equal Rights Amendment, which is languishing.
Yes, with a lot of others.
And of course, the blockage for that is in the Senate, and we won't go into details because the YWCA is a non-political organization. But you can read between the lines, they
Right.
can't, you kids.
I want to go back to the issue with the employment.
Okay?
You've got someone, you fill out a job application, you fill out a resume, and, generally ask your gender. Would you check off female?
Of course.
Or, yeah, I would think so.
But
So
here's
how do
the
they-
trick, okay?
Okay.
First of all, what do you have to put else? What else do you have to put on an application? References? If none of the people you worked for think what you're doing is the right thing and have a political opinion about it, they're not gonna give you a good reference.
Aha.
What's one of the things that they photograph? They take a Xerox copy of? Driver's license and your social security card. Well, if you haven't had your name changed, all of a sudden it's gonna say Joe Smith, and you're going by the name of Joanne Carroll, and you haven't changed that, gone through the legal name change, and all of a sudden they say, wait a minute, there's a disparity here. Your application says that you're a girl, but your driver's license says that you're a male. Sorry, we
So
can't.
that's where they catch it. Okay.
So that, and in fact, also the same thing with the social security card, because they usually take a picture of your social security card as well.
Right.
And if it says your boy name on that social security card and you haven't had that change with social security, these are all tip-offs that there's something going wrong.
Okay. All
Now,
right.
it can also be the situation, some places even ask for other bits and pieces of different kinds of things that they might want copies of, criminal reports, who knows?
Mhm.
So all of these things can contribute to the fact that somebody can find out that you're trans. Now, by the time I came to Pennsylvania, my driver's license had been changed, my name had been changed, most every document I had been changed, including my college transcripts, because I was preparing for that. And I had already conversed with all of the people that I had recently worked for and asked them for references, and they said, yes, we'd be happy to. I said, but are you comfortable with giving it for Joanne, not for my former self? Oh yeah, no problem. You still did the work.
Right,
You still
yeah.
were an outstanding employee. We'll be happy to. So that part didn't get in my way. Okay, so that's why.
But your case is unusual in that. it
Yeah,
sounds.
now here's the other,
Okay.
and the reason that it's so difficult for people to come up with either the name change or the driver's license or whatever, is to get a name change, it costs anywhere from $600 to $1,000.
Oh, good heavens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the time you file everything, you gotta file a thing with a newspaper, you gotta file a thing with pathonetaries, or the Court of Common Pleas, I'm not sure which one it goes with, but, it's an elaborate procedure. Unless you can work through that yourself, you still have the cost of the newspaper, but then most people can't work their way through the legal wickets, so they end up having to hire an attorney, and that's when the numbers get up to $1,000 and more. Well, telling you about unemployment, I would also tell you that the majority of the lesser employed people in the community, I think it's around maybe 15 or 18%, work for 10 grand a year or less.
Oh, my heavens. You can't live on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So how do you afford $600 or $1,000 to change your name so that you can get an accurate driver's license? You can't. You can't even get health care at that rate.
No.
Okay? And that's in addition to the problem with the unemployment. Even if you can get employment, you're working below poverty level. And then even if you do get employed, 90-something% of the people have talked about how they've been harassed on the job. So I mean, there's the barriers are huge. And it's no wonder that there's the suicide rate in the trans community is around 40%.
Right, right.
It's worse in kids that aren't accepted. It's around 50%. So, you know, people just can't. I can't make it, so they say I'll go somewhere else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It makes it difficult for them at any age, I think.
And then you got to look at too, you know, the harassment level. I mean, look at the problem the black community is having with law enforcement. Imagine if you're trans, how are you going to report some criminal act against you if you're transgender? 80% of the community will never report to a police officer that they're having a problem. Why? Because they're afraid they're going to get sexually objectified or harassed or molested or any number of things.
Worse, yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I read just recently that that the I think it was U.S. News and World Report said that in 2020, in the first 8 months, the number of transgender women who were murdered had reached a point that was higher than the total in all of 2019. And the vast majority of them were black women.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any thought to why?
Yep, absolutely, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Actually, I think we're somewhere in excess of 30 right now and climbing. Every year on the 20th of November, we do an event called the Transgender Day of Remembrance, an international event. And typically the numbers have been bouncing around 23 to 25 per year. That's reported. Okay, and the reason I think I have to make an asterisk on that reported, and that is that very often a newspaper with their bias will not report that death accurately. Because number one, if the person does not have the identity papers correct, obviously they're going to be reported as so-and-so, you know, a male was murdered, you know. So we don't hear about those. It's only when like family members or friends step forward and say, no, it's not John Smith, it's Josephine Smith. But then you also have the situation where some families don't want that to be published like that. And they'll say, no, it's got to be in the boy name, it can't be, or in the girl name if it's a transgender male. You know, whatever the situation may be. So that 30 doesn't include those.
So there's
So
more
we have
than what we
have
know.
no idea how many there really are. But to answer your question even more specifically about why it seems to be that black women are targeted so much, I told you about unemployment.
Right.
You're dealing with an unemployment rate of 25% or greater. You're talking about a community that's working for peanuts. You know, what have they got left? Sex trade.
Okay.
So the minute you're on the street in the sex trade, what are you? You become a walking target.
Right, right.
And I'm not saying that all black women are working in sex trade, but there's the ones that are in inner cities that can't get work. They need a place to put their head to sleep, and they need a meal. They go turn a trick to get it.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's a matter of the economics and the situation that we're faced with. And then you have people at higher levels. That's all I'm going to say. You can extrapolate that to whatever political comment you want. But people at higher levels that are denigrating, you know, people in the community. So what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Especially bad, and that's why it's worse this year probably than before, because hate has become such a process within this country. So
Yeah, hate has become very popular all of a sudden. You talk about you know, people at higher levels and issues across the country. There was one particular issue that came out not too long ago in Texas, where the Texas State of Social Workers Board of Examiners has now changed the rules where social workers are allowed to refuse service, refuse social work services to
that was a legislative action.
To anybody LGBTQ or with physical disabilities, which I've personally found absolutely appalling because of the fact that who needs those services more than people who are struggling with these issues?
Well, but then you have white supremacists that don't feel like that's their obligation to pay for those things.
Okay. So you think it came from a payment standpoint
Well,
rather than from the social workers?
What better way to get rid of a population than not give them the treatment they need? Especially if you know that there's a high suicide rate. So okay, maybe some of them will go kill themselves off,
and then we won't need to.
And then we won't have to deal with them anymore. You know, The thing I think we have to address, and I know how strongly the YWCA works in the area of racism. When I first started doing the advocacy work on behalf of Trans Central, and even more so now today, one of the things I first started out just dealing strictly with what was affecting the trans community. And all of a sudden it really dawned on me that it wasn't about the trans community by itself, it's all marginalized communities.
Right.
No matter what it is, whether it's a physical disability, a hearing problem, vision issues, whether you're trans, whether you're gay, whether, all of those things. But with all of those populations, all of those groups meet at the intersection of discrimination. And that's what we have to deal with. So if we can help our country move out of this area where discrimination seems to be the order of the day, and I won't say what the possibilities for that are, because that could get political again. Just suffice it to say I'm a progressive Democrat, so you can figure it out.
Yeah.
But at any rate, if we can solve the problem at the top and maybe try and change that dialogue to some degree, then maybe we have a chance.
Yeah, and that's a tough change. That's a tough change.
Well, hopefully it's not going to be that tough.
Yeah.
In 13 days we'll know. So.
Yeah. So, you said about that they were, all of those groups were at the intersection of discrimination.
Yes.
And yet I read in a recent article that you found here in this area, particularly at a church in Lancaster County, a lack of discrimination, in fact a very welcoming, open feel to that. What was it there that you think made you feel welcome, and what is it they're doing that maybe the rest of us could?
Well, I'll back that up a little bit and tell you that I'm on the United Church of Christ Penn Central Conference Open and Affirming Ministry team.
Okay.
And what that means is we work with congregations within the UCC, helping them come to the covenantal process where they say, we're not going to marginalize anybody, including LGBT. So I have to tell you that I wasn't initially in that kind of a church. I don't want to, for sake of keeping people, my friends, I won't even identify what, but it was a really conservative church that I was going to initially. But at that point I was living in stealth. By that means nobody knew.
Nobody knew, yeah.
And I did that for 11 years. But then when when my mom passed away, I wanted to go someplace else because the idea that the shoe could drop any time was starting to torment me.
Yeah.
Even although I was involved in a bunch of ministries in that church and whatever else. Every time the phone rang and it was the church, I thought, oh, the shoe just fell off the horse. And I just got tired of living in that nervous kind of energy.
Right.
So I went and joined First Reformed United Church of Christ downtown Lancaster. And that was an open and affirming congregation. They had gone through the covenantal process probably 5 or 6 years earlier. And basically it says everybody's welcome here. No matter where you are on life's journey, you're welcome here. No matter whether you're gay, straight, bisexual, transgender, black, white, green, pink, yellow, doesn't matter. We don't care. You're welcome here. And the church I'm going to now is Christ Church in Elizabethtown, and it's the same situation. It's an open and affirming congregation. And I'm one of the members of the social justice team on that, and one of on the leadership team on both churches. That was. So I've got an opportunity within those two organizations to try to help them become even more nurturing and helping maybe doing more in the area of discipleship, because it's not just about opening your door, it's about how do you integrate them into the actual day-to-day activities of the church and making them feel totally welcome where they can participate. Right. Faith is a situation that you get the most from it when you have an opportunity to be a part of the picture, part of the participation. And so that's one of our goals too within that ministry team, and that is to make sure that the church not only takes the covenantal action to say this is what we want to do, but takes the other steps necessary to try to enfold those people within the congregation as one of the other congregants.
Have you found communities that are as welcoming and open, or has it been simply in churches?
Well, it's fits and starts. I think it depends really on the demographic of what that church starts out with. In the case of the two churches that I've been a part of now, their populations were such that they were already involved in some social justice issues, and so it wasn't that great a leap to get to that level. But it takes a while. It takes an education process to get to that level. I've worked with two churches in Gettysburg. I won't identify them for their own benefit. But one of them, we went in, we talked about the process, and within a matter of a month or so, they went ahead and adopted it wasn't necessarily United Church of Christ, it was another denomination. But they went ahead and adopted a covenantal process, and they are now an open and affirming church. The other one, the pastor had told the groups, okay, you can meet and have these conversations all you like, but don't expect me to conduct a same-sex marriage from this church. Because it'll never happen. And because of that, there's other churches within Gettysburg that are open now, several in fact, but the membership of that church is older, they're more set in their ways, and it's hard to break through that in terms of conversation. One of the things that we teach in the process, and it's good for any situation, is a thing called graceful engagement. And what that means is that, and it's just, I'll say this for the benefit of the people that are listening in, anybody can have an argument. Anybody can sit in a conversation and make it polarized to where you have 2 points of view that'll never come together. Okay? That's easy.
Right.
The hard work is sitting down and trying to find out what you know about the other person, listening, and how you can sit there and perhaps at the ultimate come out as friends at the end of the story. There's a movie that was put out a number of years ago called Out in the Silence, and I don't remember the filmmaker's name, but I'll just say this: he grew up in Oil City, Pennsylvania. I don't think you can find any more red area or any more conservative area than Oil City, Pennsylvania.
Right.
Well, he was gay, and he realized that staying around Oil City, Pennsylvania wasn't going to be the best thing in the world for him, so he moved to Washington, D.C., and went to college and met the man of his dreams, and they got married. Now, I don't know whether he did it out of just being ornery or whatever, but he sent the wedding notice back to the Oil City paper. And of course, there was tons of pushback. But the upside was that there was a woman that contacted him who had a son that was a sophomore in high school that was already being bullied like crazy for being gay. And she says, this is a situation where my son, can you help? And so Joe and his husband packed up, he was already a documentary movie maker. They packed up all their film gear and went to Oil City. And this movie, Out in the Silence, then follows his peripatetic journey around through Oil City, talking to different people and whatever. The very first person he sits down with is a Baptist minister. Well, honey, I don't think you're going to find two dichotomous people in the world beside a gay man and a Baptist preacher.
Right.
And of course, they had their conversations. Now I'm going to cut to the end, and this is a spoiler alert. But it cuts to the end, and they're sitting at the pastor's kitchen table at the end as two friends having a cup of coffee. Yeah. Because what they did was they used that process of graceful engagement where they didn't set out to change each other's minds, they just wanted to become friends. And it's when you can make that process, I don't care whether you're talking about racism, whether you're talking about LGBT issues, whatever it may be, if you take that attitude, I'm not going to try to change the person's mind. I just want them to get to know me as a person.
Right.
And of course, if you're one of the persons that is marginalized already, like in my case as a transgender woman, you know, and they have an opportunity to meet me, and first then they realize I don't have horns and a tail, and I'm actually a real life person and not a bad person to talk to, all of a sudden we have conversations and the whole paradigm changes.
Right.
Then perhaps when that's established, then we have the opportunity maybe to move on and discuss some of the issues. But we can do it in a rational way because we don't have to go through all that feeling each other out process.
And the only issue is that takes time.
Exactly.
And so often we are not
Afraid to
willing to
invest.
invest
Yep.
the time. And that's really all it takes.
I'm working with
you
a
know.
church in Lancaster right now, and I told them, I said, are you prepared to work on this process for the next 5 or 6 years? And the team that's working on it said, yeah. I said, okay, I'll hold you to it. But I said, I don't care if I have to be here 6 years from now working on this process, it's going to take a while. If you're expecting immediate results, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Because we have to work on building friendships, and then once the friendships are built, then having the tougher conversations about what they think about that issue and maybe what that more of a biblical opportunity you have to try to get into that discussion.
But you have to start somewhere.
You start with building relationships in graceful engagement.
Great. I like that term, graceful engagement. Yeah. really do.
I do too, obviously.
Yeah. A question on a more practical level.
Okay.
If I understand correctly, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong, some transgender people will take medications to change their bodies in some way.
Mhm.
Others will take medications and do reassignment surgery.
Yeah.
For those who choose the reassignment surgery, are there insurance companies that pay for that? Or is that considered cosmetic surgery? Or how does that work? How does
A
one
lot of
afford
insurance
that?
companies would like to hide behind the idea that it's cosmetic.
Okay.
I mean, they do nothing more than really enjoy that. But here's the thing I would tell you, and that is that to understand the nature of it, the condition is known as gender dysphoria, where it's a total discomfort of the gender that you were assigned at birth, against contrasted to who you know you are.
To who you are, right.
And for a lot of us, that really becomes such a pivotal issue that you almost can't function because of it. You know, you find ways to work through that. As far as the medical intervention that are concerned, let's just talk about hormonal treatment first. We call it HRT, so if I'm abbreviating, that's hormone replacement therapy. In the case of a transgender female, a person who is assigned male at birth, you take a testosterone blocker to reduce the amount of testosterone that's in the system, and then you also couple that with an estrogen therapy to help you try to develop more female characteristics. I've been through both of those.
So you're trying to block one and
Block
increase
one and let
the
the
other.
other ones take effect.
Right.
In terms of the surgical processes, obviously, you do your best to try to grow some boobs while you're on estrogen. For
Right.
some of us that come from a long history of small boob families, that's
It just doesn't happen. Yeah.
marginally effective.
Yeah.
So in a lot of cases, you know, transgender females will seek breast enhancement surgery. In the case of a transgender male, they'll get breast reduction surgery or mammoplasty, where they basically take the breast tissue away. In the case of a transgender male, one of the other things that's a problem is if you know you're male and you're still having menses, obviously that's a problem. So
Right.
getting a hysterectomy is something that's very important. Changing the genitalia for a transgender male is very complex and very expensive. Basically, for a transgender female, the surgery is basically turning everything inside out, basically, is all that they do. And in that case, it's expensive. It's about $25,000 just to get that
Wow.
done. About boob job will cost you about $7K. So by the time you're all done, and then some girls just, no matter how good a makeup job they can do, they still look like a guy, so they end up having facial feminization surgery, and that can be anywhere from $10,000 and up. So, but
And a lot of that is self-pay because,
Now, in the case of insurance, it was a little bit better before the current administration rolled back some of the provisions out of, I don't remember if it was a policy or whatever it was called, it was 1557. And basically what it was an interpretation of the Affordable Care Act that said that transgender-related care was authorized through ACA. But in all cases, in Medicaid and Medicare, it says if it's medically necessary. And so a lot of things that I'm doing right now is talking with individuals over the phone who are trying to get that accomplished, and I'm saying, okay, you gotta make sure your doctor's really ready to die on the hill to say that how necessary that is for you. You know, they need to be able to make the statement that your dysphoria is at such a level that without that surgery, there's some danger that you might take your own life even.
Okay. So they can use your mental health as.
Yeah, even though it's not a mental health issue, it's a medical issue.
Yeah.
Because we're finding out more and more that it's a hormonal imbalance in the mother during the time the fetus is in utero. That changes happen. That's called androgen receptive. Anyway, I can't think of the correct term now, but it has to do with androgen receptive gene or something like that. But there's a defect in there. And then, of course, you have the condition of intersex, where people are born with genitalia that isn't necessarily readily identifiable.
Okay.
And I'll tell you a story about, I have a really good friend living in Knoxville, Tennessee, and got diagnosed with a prostate problem. And so one of the medications they give in that particular case is a product called Proscar. And Proscar basically is a testosterone inhibitor. Well, they said one of the side effects might be that she might grow breast tissue. Well, yeah, and in 2 months she was already about to a B cup.
Wow.
And so she went back to her doctor, or he did at that point. He said, excuse me, I know you told me that there might be a problem with breast tissue, but, you know,
Yeah.
hello? And the doctor said, well, there's got to be some other reason for that. So they did an MRI, and they found 2 ovaries up inside her body. That the minute they repressed the testosterone, those ovaries kicked in and started producing estrogens.
Wow.
Now they said, well, we can go in and find out what that's about. And he said, no, I'm not going through any exploratory surgery. I'll just deal with what it is. So Stephanie went on hormone blockers on testosterone blockers, and is now fully functioning. Well, not fully functioning as a female, but you know, is functioning as a female and living as a female full time and living authentically. So
Yeah. Good for her.
yeah, good for her.
Good,
I have another friend in Denver, Colorado, who had 3 mastectomies, breast reduction surgeries, and kept growing more boob tissue.
Oh, good heavens.
And she finally just gave up and said, okay, I guess I'm supposed to be a girl after all. So, yeah. So, I mean, you know, our bodies are really interesting.
Yes, they
You know,
are.
They do silly stuff.
Yeah.
And some of that silly stuff they do is when you're a fetus. All fetuses basically start out as female. I don't know if you know that.
Right.
And based on how the hormones release in the mother's body, that's how secondary sex characteristics come into play. And if the hormone level isn't right, it doesn't change the brain.
Right.
You know, so you can have all of the physical attributes change into male, but still end up with a brain that's basically influences female.
Right. Right.
Now, Dr. Rachel Levine could describe this a whole heck of a lot better than I can, but
Yeah.
that's as best as a layperson can do.
And she's very busy right now
Oh, God,
keeping up
yes.
with COVID.
And
so yeah.
if nothing else, just dodging the slings and arrows of
Yeah,
outrageous fortune.
unfortunately, she has to do that too. So, tell me a little bit about Trans Advocacy Pennsylvania. That's a group you started, I believe.
Yeah.
To
Well, actually, it was started by a board of directors, and they brought me on as executive
okay,
director.
all right. So, what all?
Okay,
is provided
Transgender
by that?
Advocacy Pennsylvania is the first and only exclusively transgender advocacy organization in the Commonwealth.
Oh, okay.
Now, there are LGBT organizations that and support groups that exist, but we deal strictly with transgender issues.
Okay.
At least that's what we were supposed to do. Unfortunately, because we're noted now, people are reaching out to us from all different walks of life, asking us to get involved in the advocacy side of things, because there's a lot of people that don't have a voice at the table, and they're asking us to be intermediaries for them in different ways. But our primary goal is to, or not primary, but we have our mission statements on our website, by the way. And what we try to do is support research, whether we
Okay.
do that ourselves or assist other organizations in the research that they do. Try to find and identify resources and make those available to the transgender community. Cooperate with all other LGBT organizations within the Commonwealth, because obviously we have overlapping responsibilities to some degree. Public education is a huge part of it. Obviously that's been slowed down obviously by COVID, because we just can't get on the road anymore. This one's an exception, but we're not talking to a room full of people.
Right.
A lot of what I've been doing is on Zoom, a lot of different Zoom calls and things like that. Did a WebEx this morning for another group. And one of the things that's interesting is that, and I mentioned this kind of earlier, and that is we've had a lot of people reaching out to us. I had a girl up in Lock Haven that called me and said, I'm having trouble with my insurance carrier that doesn't want to do hair removal. And she says, I'm extremely hairy. There's no way in the world that I'll ever be able to function as a female with all this body hair. And said, now they gave me a test run. I mean, they gave me a one treatment. And then when I went back for more, the insurance company thumbed their nose at me. And she said, I'm having really a lot of trouble getting this done. And I said, well, I'll tell you what you do. And I told her, okay, document everything that's going on. Every conversation that you have, follow it up with an email saying on such and such a day at such and such a time we had this conversation. document every single, the emails, and it's okay, if they send you an email, follow it up by saying, I just received your email that said this, 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 and this. So that they realize you're doing a paper trail on everything that's taking place. And I said, once you get that done extensively, if need be, and they haven't caught on that, I said, I can go to the Department of Health, because Dr. Levine and I are very good friends. We've known each other for 15 years or more. And they have insurance representatives within the DOH, and they also have Department of Insurance as a separate entity. And I said, I have contacts in both of those. And so I said, if the insurance company doesn't catch on what you're doing, I said, we always can elevate the thing. And the insurance company caught on.
Mm-hmm.
And so they began giving her the hair removal treatments. I now have a girl in Chester County that's running into the same problem, but she's just starting out. And so I use that as the model and says, okay, this is what we need to do, boom, 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 take these steps, and then if we run into a brick wall, then we can kick it in the high gear.
Then we can go, yeah. I used to work for a Medicare approved agency, a visiting nurse association, and that was the first thing we were taught: document, document,
Yeah.
document. You know, you write everything.
Well, as private citizens, we're awfully lackadaisical about that.
Right. Well, we take people at their word.
Yeah, I know. You can't do that
Yeah.
anymore, especially when it deals with legalities such as insurance.
Right.
So, if you're creating a paper trail where they can't escape and can't dodge the bullet when it's all over with,
Right.
all of a sudden they realize, we may need to do something different here.
Yeah.
So-
Does Trans Advocacy provide any financial support for people who are going through this, or?
I wish we were,
Uh-huh.
but not really. There is an organization up in Northeast Pennsylvania that is now starting to do some of that, trying to assist people with, changing name changes and stuff like that. But they're getting a lot of grant money from other different kinds of sources than we're able
you
to
can
tap
get,
into,
right.
because that's really not in our mission. So.
Mhm. Yeah. So your primary role is advocacy and support, for
Yeah,
folks.
yeah.
So,
Well, education is our primary education, and we do the advocacy by educating people about what transgender is all about. That's what this is about. This is helping in the education part of our job.
right. Lou, do we have questions
I
from
have a
viewers?
couple of questions.
Oh, good.
I started a little while ago, so there's like 3 or 4. So let's see. I think you touched on some of these subjects, but what's a good resource to begin the conversation in a church? Is there a model to guide the covenant-making education and movement forward? So I guess they're looking for some resources to help start those conversations in their church.
The United Church of Christ has a thing called the Open and Affirming Coalition, and they have a separate function on that. If you just go into United Church of Christ, Open and Affirming, there's a whole lot of resources in there. They have webinars, they have all kinds of different things that exist where you can mine that for information, and that's a good start. Also, if you go through a thing called Building an Inclusive Church, BUIC, they also have resources available. That's where the graceful engagement comes from, is building an inclusive church. Now, individual denominations, the Presbyterian Church has reconciling ministries, or the ELCA has their own process. Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, Methodists are going through their own struggle right now, which maybe will get resolved like next year when they have their great get together. But some of the individual Methodist churches are starting the process of breaking away, because it's just, they already are open and affirming churches, and they just don't want to, or they have welcoming dialogue or whatever it's called. But so there's all kind of resources for that. But I think the primary one would be through the United Church of Christ, because it's pretty elaborate what they have available. So.
Excellent.
What's our
We
next?
have a "Hi Joanne, I miss you" from Sabrina, who then also asks, what impact have you seen is COVID-19 having on the transgender community, and how can allies continue to support the community in the midst of this pandemic?
Wow, that's big. Obviously, marginalized communities are the ones that are being affected the most, simply because they don't have access to health care. I told you that 80% of the community does not seek police protection. Coincidentally, 80% of the community doesn't seek medical attention either. because in a lot of cases they get objectified or preyed upon while they're in a medical setting. Because not all hospitals have gone through cultural competency and cultural humility training. So they're afraid that that's going to happen. And the worst case I ever heard of, there was a young, I can't remember where it was at now, but there was a young woman that was injured in a hit and run. She was a pedestrian, and she was laying on the sidewalk unconscious. And of course the EMTs came along, picked her up, took her to the ER, and her documentation said that she was female. But of course when they stripped her down to go ahead and do the assessment of her injuries, obviously they discovered that she had male body parts. And that became the most funny thing they'd ever seen in their life. And so they were, saying all kind of derogatory things like tranny and just making fun of this girl. What they didn't realize is she wasn't unconscious, she was semi-conscious. So she heard every bit of that. Well, I'm telling you, how can you possibly think you're in a healing environment when they're deriding you like that? And so one of the things that we do a lot of work with is working with hospitals and trying to get their cultural competency built up. We've done a lot of work with Penn State. We've done work with WellSpan. We've done work with Lancaster General, the Penn Medicine. A lot, not necessarily just us, but a lot of organizations have done that work. So yeah, we've done some training with Geisinger. So.
Just a comment. Thank you for.
By the way, hi Sabrina. I missed you, baby girl.
Thank you, YWCA, for having discussions like this and opening minds and doors, and we're always welcome to exploring and empowering people, and especially marginalized groups. So you're welcome.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here to have that opportunity.
That's right. We're so happy to have you, I tell you. I can only imagine that you have been victimized by haters. How do you respond?
Well, that's another interesting thing. I've only been misgendered twice in my life. And about 3 years ago, I had an AFib flutter that was brought on by heavy steroid use for an allergy problem I had. And I can say that unequivocally because my doctor even agreed with that. That was probably what the contributing factor was. But as a male RN that was checking me in and I can say which hospital it was Lancaster Regional. They're no longer in business, so it doesn't matter.
Is this why?
No, I don't think so. But the male nurse that checked me in said, as he was leaving the room, "Good night, sir." And I went, "Excuse me?" I said, "What did you just say?" He says, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." I said, "What does it say on my chart? Doesn't it say that I'm female?" He says, "Yes, ma'am, I'm so sorry." And the next day, then they brought in the cardiologist, and they were doing some, heart studies and whatever else. And he was setting up an appointment for me to come in and see him that following week to get a monitor and all that kind of junk. And as he's leaving the room, he said, "Okay, sir, we'll see you later." I said, "Doctor?" He says, "Ah, shit, I knew better."
Oh.
So, excuse my language, but that was a direct quote.
Yeah.
So those are the only 2 times I've been misgendered. So in terms of that question, have I run into any haters? Actually, no. But then I have the privilege of passing fairly well. People see me, they don't think of me as male. I still get doors open for me. I get people calling me ma'am. I've never had somebody outright do that. I had a question one time whether some teenage girls were struggling with it because they were giggling, but they were giggling over there. I don't know whether that had anything to do with me or not, but they were giggling after they looked at me, but so who knows. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
Okay. And at this point, that's what we have. If anybody has any other questions, please
Please
type
write
them in.
in. I do have
Okay.
some more questions.
I can do this
so-
as long as you want, so
Yeah,
it's okay.
oh, that's good.
I don't have to catch a
Good.
train and being retired,
Yeah.
I'm not punching a clock anywhere, so
Yeah,
I'm good.
that's good, that's good.
I may have to end sooner or later because I need something to eat, but.
Yeah. One thing that I always want to ask our guests when we have these enlightened conversations is what can the rest of us do? In this case, cisgender men and women. What is it that we can do to help, and what is it we do unknowingly that hurts, that makes things worse?
Well, if you've gone through any of the training with the YWCA on the racism issues, you already have the answer to some of those questions. Obviously, stay away from the pejorative terms,
Obviously.
like tranny or faggot or any of those things that people have a tendency to use. Stay away from that kind of language. The same way you wouldn't use the N-word or
Exactly.
some of the euphemisms for somebody of color. And then when you're dealing with somebody who's part of the LGBT community, don't make assumptions. And don't be afraid to admit your stupidity. And let me give you an example. If you see somebody who, for all intents and purposes, perhaps is presenting as female, but maybe looks as male, okay? There's a way that you can handle that and say, excuse me, I want to be able to handle a conversation that we have, but I'm getting mixed vibrations from you. Would you mind at all telling me what's with you? I don't want to make a mistake. Or see somebody that's maybe presenting as female, but they look a little bit male. Say, which pronouns do you want me to use? What name do you prefer? And if I ask the question in a clumsy way, please excuse me, because it's my own ignorance that keeps me from asking the question correctly. So I mean, as long as you're humble about it, in other words, cultural humility, then I think you have a better chance of making the conversations work. And as far as allyship is concerned, how would you be an ally to a black person? How would you be an ally to somebody who's disabled? How, by obviously, standing up for that person. If you see something, say something.
Right.
If you see somebody being treated improperly, by God, stand up and say, hey, no, that's what you're doing is inappropriate. I can't, and don't do that around me, because I'll be in your face for as long as you stand here, So I mean, if you take the courage to take that step and say, no, I'm sorry, that's just not appropriate, that's how you become an ally. It's almost impossible to be a true ally because you can't walk in my shoes.
Exactly.
You can't know what it means to be black.
Right.
You can't know what it means to be disabled unless you have some disability. You can't know what it means to be trans because you haven't had that experience.
Right.
So don't make presumptions that you know. And if there's questions that you don't know, just like you're doing here, ask the question. But because we were already you set the tone for it in your opening remarks, we already knew that how you were going to be asking those questions, plus I had a chance to review them in advance. But so I mean, that's kind of unfair. But because we already had that opportunity to decide what the level of conversation was going to be, then that changed the paradigm too.
Right.
So, but you don't necessarily have that in interpersonal reactions. So, but if you admit the fact, hey, I don't know what I don't know, but I don't want to make any mistakes. How can I deal with you in my ignorance? You talked about earlier about Emmanuel Acho and the series Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. And by the way, for your viewers that are watching this, if you're not looking at that on YouTube, you need to. It's incredibly revealing. And some of the things that Emmanuel talks about, and you football guys can think about this, he used to be a linebacker for the Eagles, by the way. So anyway, but some of the things that he talks about, regardless of whether it's a race or not, or whether it's dealing with the LGBT community, there's a level of applicability, I think, that you can kind of move over to the next column and say, okay, there's some things that relate there.
Right.
Yeah.
A person who is marginalized for any reason is marginalized.
Period,
And
yeah.
needs support,
Yeah.
Regardless of what caused it.
Yeah.
I think, in personal opinion, I think some people who are marginalized may need more support because they may have multiple things that are marginalizing them. A black person who is transgender, who is also disabled, they've got a lot
And there's some
that
of
they're
that, there's
dealing
some of
with.
that.
Exactly. Yeah.
One of the things I think that maybe we should talk about for your viewers is the difference between equality, equity, and no barriers. Equality is if you have three kids standing trying to look over a fence and they're different heights. Equality is when you put the right size box in front of each one of them so that they can all stand and look over the fence together.
Right.
Equity is moving that fence down to where they all can peer over the top of the fence. Removing the barriers gets rid of the damn fence.
Yeah. Exactly.
The kids in my church had a thing about a year ago called shorter fences and longer tables. And what they had was this whole series of like picket fences, and they took it apart and made a big long table out of it.
Yeah, so that there's room for everyone at the
Yeah, so
table.
there's room for everyone. So I mean, that's it. Let's eliminate the barriers. If not being able to get employed is because you're black, okay, don't make the fact that your name is Xavier or some kind of a name that would imply you're black. Don't make that be a barrier. Get that out of your mind. You might be turning away the most incredible employee just because you're taking that bias, or just because the job says it's for a man and some female applies for it. I'm sorry, that doesn't work either.
Right.
You're going to lose out on some hugely important employees by taking those kind of things.
Right.
Now, the other thing I would tell you, and that is, and if you watch the Emanuelacho one on religion, on faith, he talks to a megachurch pastor out of someplace back east, we're in back east, but I think it was in New York State. And he talks about what his role is as a father. And he said, when a family of color came in, they weren't being seated right away, they were being jerked around or whatever. He said, it's my obligation as a father now to educate my kids. He said, did you see how that family was being treated and how that contrasted how we were treated when we walked in? And they so make that contrast and do the same thing with people that are around you. Did you see that? Like what was that program? What would you do?
It's an ABC program. Yeah.
So I mean, that's a perfect example of people are willing to stand up on their hind legs and say, "Nope, time out. That doesn't work."
That doesn't work.
That's how you become an ally. Long answer to a short question.
No, but it's an important answer. Yeah. Basically, it's speak up.
Yeah. Stand up. I mean, you have to remember that the community that you're standing up for feels like they have no voice. Because they feel like nobody wants to hear them. Because number one, I'm black. Nobody wants to hear from somebody who's black. Well, if all of a sudden you as a person of no melanin stands up and says, wait a minute, you got to treat that person the same way you treat me, it's that simple.
And the same way, whether it's somebody who is transgender or
whatever.
LGBT or
Do we know each other?
No.
Okay, you look familiar.
I'm just everything.
Okay. I'm talking to some guy in the back of the room, so in case everybody's wondering.
I wanted to make sure before we end this evening that we reminded viewers how they can get in touch with Joanne through the Trans Advocacy Pennsylvania group.
Just go to our website, the best way.
Yep, and that's, the website is transadvocacypennsylvania.org. And there's also a phone number there, 717-220-3361. I believe Trans Advocacy PA is a non-for-profit.
Yes, we're a 501c3 duly authorized, but don't ever say Trans Advocacy PA because that won't get you to our website.
Okay, Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania spelled out. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure they would welcome contributions of any type.
Of course, yeah.
So
we're struggling. I mean, obviously, as I said earlier in the conversation, that a lot of nonprofits are really hurting because the well is dried up. So.
Yes. Hopefully your lights aren't blinking like this one.
Well, since I work out of my home and it's an apartment, and all I have to do is call the apartment complex and say, "You got a light that's not working."
So, okay.
I had two blinds that weren't working, so they came and replaced those today.
Maybe we should call them and tell them.
No, I don't.
They
They won't reach out quite this far. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, it's time for us to sign off. Joanne, thank you very much.
My
I
pleasure.
really appreciate. We had a great hour. I can't believe it's been an hour already.
Let me throw something in for you, just
Okay.
for giggles. One of the things I follow is something I call is the starfish plan. I don't know if you ever heard the story about the little boy on the beach who picks up a starfish and he throws it in the water. And this old man has been walking down the beach and he says, "Honey, what are you doing?" He says, "I'm saving starfish." And he says, "Honey, look," he says, "there's so many." He said, "What do you think you can do?" He says, "Well, I saved one." So what we operate under with Trans Advocacy Pennsylvania, if we can make life better for one person or change one mind in the course of one day, we've done our job. So if by coming here to Hanover tonight and talking on this YouTube broadcast changes life for somebody or changes somebody's impression, we've done our job.
We've done our job, and I believe we probably have. So, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you again in a few weeks for the next Enlightened conversation. Keep your eyes peeled on the YWCA Facebook page for information on that date and topic. Thank you.